Thank you very much.
Horseshoe shape to get you guys to be nicer to each other. Yeah, I agree with you.
I would actually,
Differently designed.
I would just put a proper.
So we're going to kick off our second session, our Vote for Music session. Just to give you a little bit of an insight into how we're going to run this, I'm going to talk a little bit first of all about the Vote for Music campaign and what that was about. And then we have Ed Vaizey and Chris Bryant here with us today, who are each going to give a 5-minute response to the votes that came out of the campaign. And then we're going to move into a general Q&A session. I'll introduce the panelists to you in a second. We'll move into a general Q&A session, and there will be plenty of time for you guys to ask questions as well. So if you've got questions as you listen, then do store them up, and we will come to you with a mic. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Vote for Music. Some of you may well have taken part in it. It was a campaign that we ran during the election campaign, which asked the question of anyone who loved music, what would be the one thing, if there was just one thing that the next government should do for the music industry, for independent music, what would that one thing be? It was deliberately apolitical. We just wanted to see what people, what fans, what musicians, what promoters thought about that question. Obviously at that point we didn't know which government we were going to get. We all thought that we were probably going to have a hung parliament, so we didn't quite know how the whole thing was going to pan out, but anyway. So that ran over the last 4 weeks of the campaign. You could vote online, or you could vote in one of these ballot boxes, which went into venues around the country. And we partnered with a fantastic organisation, Music Venues Trust, to do that. And they were brilliant to work with. And it meant that we didn't just have to keep it online. We could actually put it in front of music fans in venues, which was great. And we also partnered with The Great Escape, which is where we announced the results. We weren't quite as fast. There's some of the votes up there you can see. Some of you might see yourself in those slides. Don't squeal if you do. I know some of you are a bit squeamish about seeing yourself on slides. We announced the results on the 15th of May. We were a bit slower than Sunderland at counting the results. It took us a week rather than 45 minutes, but we got there in the end. And of the 1,500 votes that were cast, 4 issues kind of topped the poll. And those were, first of all, music education. Secondly, a call for just a continued commitment to funding the arts and funding music. A third set of votes around the agent of change principle, which I'll come on to in a minute and explain to you for those of you that aren't familiar with it. And then a fourth batch of votes, which are around tax policy. So those were the 4 things which attracted significantly more votes than anything else. I should be clear that you could vote for anything. We weren't giving people a set of tick boxes that they could tick. So this literally did come through from people's own, from their own mouths, as it were. So the first issue that came up was music education, and there were 2 sorts of votes that came through, the 2 messages that came through around music education. The first was a call for the government of the day to ring-fence funding, to maintain its commitment to music education, and secondly, for it to make it a statutory part of the core curriculum, so something that every school child would have the opportunity to experience. The next set of votes were a more sort of disparate vote. You'll see that some of them were more polite than others. I don't know if you can read them all there, but a general call for funding for music, and in particular funding for grassroots activities. So artists at the start of their careers, venues working at the grassroots, and I guess a recognition of the importance of that kind of layer of the, that layer of the pyramid in terms of making sure that there are people able to move to the top of the pyramid. The third set of votes, as I said, were around the agent of change principle, much politer bunch of voters than the people voting about funding. And the agent of change principle is basically, it's a piece of planning legislation really, and what people were asking to be brought into law was the idea that venues would no longer be responsible for addressing the nuisance issues, the noise issues that developers, this is an example, that developers complain about when they're building apartments next to venues. So it's the idea that whoever is responsible for that change, whoever is creating that change should be responsible for the implications of it. So if you're the developer building those flats next to a venue that's been there for 30 years, been doing amazing business, giving people the chance to hear live music, you should be responsible for footing the bill and dealing with all the implications around those people saying it's quite noisy. So that's basically the legislation that those voters were asking to be introduced. And the final one was a series of votes around tax policy, which was interesting for us because you wouldn't think a bunch of people that work in the music industry would vote about tax, but they did. So it's very interesting. There were lots of different calls here. Some people were asking for VAT relief on tickets, so exemption from that, or the VAT to be reapplied into music. Some people were asking for tax breaks, which obviously exist already in some parts of the music industry. And some people were asking for the money from those tax breaks to again be reintroduced. So those were the 4 things that came through in the campaign. And what we wanted to do today was to ask Chris and Ed to respond particularly to those 4 issues and perhaps more generally in terms of the manifesto commitments that they had to the arts. And then we're going to have a Q&A with Peter, who you've met already, and then Vick Bain from the British Association of Songwriters, Composers and Authors, who is, I guess, here to sort of represent the voice of the artist.
The creators.
Yeah, just in case you didn't know.
Who are they?
That's your role. So I'm going to invite Ed to come up first of all and give, I'm throwing badges now, to give his response to the Vote for Music. You've got 5 minutes, Ed. I've got a bell. I'm going to keep you to time. And the floor is yours.
You're attached to your thing on the floor. God, honestly, you need a fluffer.
That's a great.
It's a good start.
That would have been a good photo.
That's very.
I hope nobody had their smartphone out. Great, fantastic to be here with my good friend Chris Bryant for the Ed and Chris show touring the country. And thanks so much for all of you for being here. And obviously, it's an incredibly hot day. It's the hottest day of the year. I think it's possibly the hottest day of the decade. It may be the hottest day of the century. So the commitment not only to buy a ticket, but to come here today, I think shows this audience's passion for music. I hope that the speakers on this panel can match it. I'll do my best to. I think I'll start with education. So Baz mentioned in his talk about music hubs. This was something that I was very proud of achieving in the last government. I've been the culture minister for the whole of the last coalition government, and before that I was the opposition spokesman for 4 years. And I started talking to Darren Henley and indeed Howard Goodall about music education when I was in opposition. And so when we came into government, one of the first things I did was commission Darren to do this report on music education, because I wanted to get into the Department of Education very early. I wanted to get the money because I knew that they were devolving money down to schools, and I knew if that happened, a lot of the music money would fall between the cracks. So I wanted to get it ring-fenced. I wanted a new model which brought quite a lot of, I suspect, quite a lot of people in this audience, hopefully, into the music education delivery, because it was too siloed in local authorities. I wanted to make it contestable so that although the vast majority of grants have gone to local authorities, I wanted to ensure they had formal partnerships, and I wanted to ensure they didn't sit on their laurels and think we're just going to get this money forever. It's renewed every 3 years. I wanted the Arts Council to manage it because I thought they were in the best position to do it. And contrary to what Baz said, this work was not commissioned for Andrew Adonis and the Labour government and then implemented by us. It was commissioned by me, an original idea by Ed Vaizey, executed by Darren Henley and Peter Bazalgette. And it's gone well. The Department for Education really likes it. It's early days. It will evolve, but I was delighted when they found extra money for music hubs. So in a climate of austerity, if you like, funding for music hubs actually went up. Music remains part of the curriculum until you're 14. They've reformed the GCSEs as well. The Department for Education, we are in constant dialogue with them about the importance of music. The other side effect, I know I'm massively running out of time now. The other thing we wanted to do with music education was to bring some coherence. So what Labour did do was pilot these in-harmony schemes, which I think are absolutely fantastic, which is kind of all orchestral tuition for young kids, particularly in quite deprived areas. And what doing the music hubs allowed us to do was to bring in the In Harmony schemes, not only to extend them, to bring them within the music hubs framework so that we could sustain them and carry them forward. In terms of live music, I mean, Baz talked a lot about what the Arts Council has done to support live music. We've obviously as well made some changes to licensing to make it easier to perform live music, to get rid of some of the regulations on live music. Things like the Music Export Fund was something that came out of direct lobbying from the music industry saying, can you put together a fund with UKTI to support bands who want to go on tour around the world? So we brought that into being as well. That's been pretty successful as well. But I know that there'll be some talk, I'm sure, during the panel debate about music venues, a threat to music venues. I'm very interested in, I've still got to learn what it is to be a government minister. You can't just make news in public because people think that's going to be government policy. But I certainly think it is worth having a debate about business rates. And it's also worth having a debate about, we automatically think of theatres as part of the Arts Council's firmament and remit and as part of the ecology that makes up the cultural placemaking. We should be thinking of music venues, in my view, in the same way. The agent of change principle is a complex issue. There have actually been quite a lot of changes, including changes to the National Planning Policy Framework to make it clear to councils that if somebody is building a development near a music venue, or indeed any business that makes noise, if I can put it that way, it is up to the developer to put in place mitigation, as in soundproofing, and actually the common law, as in a court case, I think it was Coventry and Lawrence, also made it clear that if you come to a nuisance, as it were, if you come to a place where there's a music venue or another business making noise, you do now have a duty to mitigate some of that. And that's sort of updating a law from case law from the 19th century. As far as tax relief is concerned, we did introduce the tax relief for orchestras. The Chancellor, having seen the success of film tax relief, has gradually increased the range of tax relief. So first he did it for content with animation and television and video games. Now he's done it for performance, if you like, for theatres and orchestras. Again, always dangerous for a government minister to muse in public, but we are always open to people coming to us with a coherent case for tax relief. The Chancellor likes them. He thinks they're effective in supporting the arts and culture. So if you have views and thoughts about what might be the most effective way to support the music industry, potentially through tax relief, the door is always open, but it has to be obviously a well-made case, has to be costed, and has to be within what the Chancellor feels he can afford at any one time. So I hope I haven't set too many hairs running. I hope I've given you a brief overview of what we've done, and no doubt a lot more will come through the discussion, but thank you very much for giving me my 5 minutes.
I'll just go over to that. I'm just starting. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm starting my. No, it doesn't want to work. I was going to time myself. I'm Chris Bryant. I'm the MP for the Rhondda. I feel I need to make this clear because when I came in, somebody said, could I sell them a guitar? I am not Chris Bryant's Musical Instruments, which is a very well-established business off Tottenham Court Road. You all look mystified, but I'm sure some of you must have popped in there. And I'm really conscious that music is it's a fundamental part of life. I used to be a vicar many, many years ago, and I remember when I was training, one of the things that we were taught was a second century mystic had said that there were only two rivers you could never dam up in life. One was spirituality and the other was sexuality. Well, I would add a third, which is creativity. I think it's an intrinsic part of humanity that you want to tell your story, you want to fashion things, you want to use your voice, whether it's singing or in whatever way, to express and tell stories and create. It's something you cannot dam up in people, and if you try to dam up in people or in a society, I think you end up with a weaker version of humanity than need be. And indeed, music, perhaps, as Peter was saying earlier, is quintessentially intrinsic to our humanity because, I'll give you an instance. I've often wondered why it is that the moment I hear the tune Moon River, you know, from Breakfast at Tiffany's, won Henry Mancini the Oscar and so on, why I just well up with tears. And it's not because it was played as I walked in for my wedding 5 years ago. I think I chose it for my wedding because it makes me well up with tears. It's because it was #1 in the charts for most of the time that I was in my mother's womb. And it may just be, and I only realised this the other day because another friend of mine who was born 5 days after me has exactly the same reaction to Moon River. So we've decided that, you know, what gets played when in the charts when you're in the womb is, so from conception through to death, music is with us. And it's great being in Cecil Sharp House. He played, I don't know whether many of you know much about Cecil Sharp, he played a phenomenally important part in resurrecting, refinding all sorts of ancient tunes that have been part of English folk music, Scottish folk music, Irish folk music, and bringing them back into popular culture. For instance, I mean, I know that one of the hymns that will be played at my funeral is to a very, very old English tune that Ralph Vaughan Williams found because of a conversation he'd had with Cecil Sharp, which is the I heard the voice of Jesus say, "Come unto me and rest," to Kingsfold, a tune which has probably been around for 600 years or so. So it's essential to our humanity and to our Britishness, and we are bloody good at it in this country. I mean, that's one of the phenomenal things about, you know, the fact that we had, I think, every #1, all of the top 10 albums last year in the world were British. I mean, it's just a phenomenal, from British artists, is a phenomenal achievement. But my anxiety is twofold. First of all, what's happening to those small venues in this country? Some of them pretty grungy, pretty, you know, I mean, they're not the most beautiful places to perform in, but that's why they're cheap and why they're available for many artists when they're just starting out. And need, you know, an opportunity to find an audience. Maybe it's only going to be 8 people the first week, and maybe they all hate it, and then you change your work, and 2 weeks later you've got more people and so on. That's kind of seedbed of experimentation, I think, relies on those small venues up and down the country, and some of them are actually very old. And I worry that more and more of those are disappearing. And whatever Ed, who is a lovely, lovely person, but in the end is still a Conservative, whatever Ed says, and he's dressed like one today, I see. This is dressed down Conservative today.
I'm better dressed than you are today.
I'm wearing a tie. There are standards. There are standards that have to... And incidentally, Duchamp, a British designer... Oi, stop heckling.
With a jeans.
And I can't remember what the point I was going to make. Anyway, it was just kind of hate Tories, please, kind of point. Well, no, the point was, it's kind of the Madame Jojo's principle, that the rules may be changing marginally around planning, but the truth is that all too often the developer gets their way with local authorities up and down the land, and the small venue goes. And I think we need to find a way of reworking this so that the balance of power shifts considerably. Apparently, I've got 1 more minute. And there are some venues in particular that I've been campaigning around, and you'll doubtless have ones of your own that you maybe want to raise with me later. But and the other thing is just about music education. It's all very well, again, saying that there's money going into music hubs, but actually, if you have a Secretary of State for Education who says that an arts education will hold you back, or qualification will hold you back for the rest of your life, I think you've undermined arts education and you've made it more difficult for teachers for music teachers to prosper and persuade kids to do music. If you then have a schools minister who said since the general election that he doesn't regret the marginalising of arts education, I think you are undermining arts education in this country. And my passionate belief is you're not going to prosper as a country musically unless you say that no school in this country should be judged a good school unless it's good at arts, cultural and music education. No school in this country should be judged outstanding by Ofsted or by any parent unless it's good, outstanding arts, cultural and music education. Some of that's about money, but some of it's actually about the messages we send out as politicians, because it's got to be from cradle to grave, from conception to death. It's got to be that we support and are passionate about our creativity in this country. Thank you.
not sure if I should let the two of you sit next to each other in case something really bad happens.
It's a bromance. But he's not my type.
So I'm going to bring you in just as...
That really hurts me.
You're easily hurt.
So I'm going to bring you in as soon as I can. I just wanted to go to Vic first and then Peter to give us a very brief sort of response, both to the votes, if you would, but also to what you've just heard from these two rogues.
I think they're all very good points. Education, finance, protecting the venues that music is created and played in. And I think what struck me is actually how similar both of those speeches were. So we've got two people here who are politically different, but finding some common ground, I think, in their support for the creative industries and music. So that was, that was a very positive thing. I hope we can take that away.
Great. Peter?
The funding for the music education hubs that we have Ed to thank for, and he was talking about, went up this year, which was really welcome. And of course, we're now waiting to hear what the funding plans of the entire government are for the next 3 or 5 years, which we'll learn in the autumn. So I'm hoping very much that music hubs continue to be supported. And I'll just chuck one other completely new thing into the conversation. I met some people yesterday, and I was talking to somebody when I arrived this morning about it, who've set up something called the Copyright Hub, and done some really interesting, I know you know about it, Ed, some really interesting thinking, actually world-leading thinking about what identifiers on digital content need to be to make people honest, to make reporting and identification easy. We've really done some great thinking here, and I hope all of us, in our different ways, are going to get behind this, because I think it's a really good step forward. I can't explain precisely what it is because I haven't got time, but the Copyright Hub, do have a look at it. I think it's a really interesting step forward, and I think we should all get behind it.
Peter, can I ask you a question? Why do you think it was that in January, Sajid Javid, the Culture Secretary, said that there was going to be an £83 million cut to the Arts Council budget this year?
I don't know, and I don't speak for the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. But all I know is, let me just say, what I know about funding is that this year, 15-16, we have had an in-year cut of 0.35%, which compared to the cuts of some of the other ministries of 2, 3, 4 and 5%, means that we're able to take that on board with our efficiencies and not pass it on to any arts council. So I'm very grateful to DCMS and everybody else I should thank for that. So this year is good, but we wait with nervousness and anticipation to see what the funding plans are for the next 5 years. But I don't recognise what you just said, but I can't speak for the Conservative Party.
And the Labour Party supported it.
No, we didn't.
Yes, you did.
No, we didn't.
Yes, you did.
Steady.
The tweet is out there.
No.
The tweet is out there. We will not reverse the cut, said the Labour Party.
You didn't. So you did make a cut.
And it went.
So there was an £83 million cut.
No, there wasn't.
Ah, right.
We put it out there.
So why did you say that there was going to be one?
We just wanted to see
You just
whether
forgot, didn't you?
Whether you were genuine.
what that number
Added up the figures
Okay.
wrong.
Whether you were genuine
number
or
means
bogus.
nothing.
Okay.
It turned out you were
didn't
completely bogus.
No, you wouldn't treat Dimbleby like this, would you? So I'm gonna step in and play my Dimbleby card here. So does anybody have a question? Yeah, so just down here and then Sybil here.
Mike's coming.
Can we take all three at one time, and then that will give us a chance to
Hi. Yeah, my name's Chris Sharp, no relation to Cecil, unfortunately. I own the Fleece Live music venue in Bristol. Last week we found out that the planning inspector upheld the appeal of the developer against fixed shut windows in their building opposite. We're incredibly disappointed with this. They've also awarded costs to Bristol City. Actually, Bristol City Council were on our side. They are the people that suggested that windows should be fixed shut. This was done last summer. Then I was delighted when I saw the change to the National Planning Policy Framework on Christmas Eve, which seemed to be moving towards Bristol City Council's brave decision to apply these fixed shut windows. I was delighted when I saw that. I thought, well, that's great. The government are behind us. We're not going to lose. Unfortunately, the planning inspector ignored our request for an attended visit. He came on a Wednesday when we had 4 local bands, no club night, no people outside smoking. The windows, basically, the bedrooms are going to be 20 metres from our stage. These are very sensible restrictions that were put on to try to protect us. The change to the National Planning Policy Framework has totally let us down, and the inspectors ignored it.
Okay,
I'm just here to let you know that, and any other council now in the country that wants to try to put these restrictions on is going to be put off because they've just been awarded costs.
Okay, we're going to take the other two questions and then we'll respond to all of those if that's all right. So it's Sybil. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. My name's Sybil Bell. I'm here representing Music Venue Trust. I also run Independent Venue Week. You often hear at a time of crisis, specifically the car industry, always saying the government has to support the car industry because there's so many secondary and tertiary businesses that it supports. I don't think music is any different at all, actually. And if you look at an artist, for example, like Ed Sheeran, who's one man and a guitar, the infrastructure that's around him and the number of people that support him. So I wonder if one of the reasons that music and arts is subject to cuts, especially when you look at the UK Music Report and the fact that 7 out of the last 10 albums have come from British artists, do the government view the fact that music does so well in spite of not great funding as a reason not to continue great funding?
Okay, and then we'll just take Crispin's question and then come back.
This isn't about live music, but I'm Crispin from British Underground. Yesterday saw the launch of Apple's Music app. Now that, as far as I can see and looking in the press this morning and last night, is a complete tectonic shift in the way that music works. Independent musicians who perhaps are outside AIM, the BPI, are not going to have a great relationship with Apple. Is there any way that the Arts Council, through projects in the future, can help a dialogue between those enormous companies that don't care about what is underneath the main industry, can help us have a dialogue, set up programs that will help independent musicians be part of that dialogue?
Okay, so we are short of time on this panel, so I'm going to ask Ed, would you be able to come back on the planning policy comments?
Well, look, I'll look at the Bristol City Council decision. I mean, as I say, that certain changes have been made, not just, there's been a court case that has made changes, and there's also been changes to the planning guidance, but planning inspectors are effectively like judges, so they take a planning decision and they take the appeal of the developer and they, in theory, weigh up all the issues and issue a judgment. And so there will be some planning inspectors who will issue a judgment we support and agree with, and some they will issue a judgment which we disagree with, but I'm very happy to look at it. The Music Venues Trust, I really welcome the creation of the Music Venues Trust. And if you talk about, I mean, I would obviously dispute, mainly because I'm the Culture Minister, the level of cuts that have been made to the arts, and we work very hard to protect as much as possible the funding that goes to organisations that actually do deliver great art. But I mean, I think if you make, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, a comparison between music venues and pubs. So the Department of Communities and Local Government, for example, works quite hard to look at how it can support pubs, a lot of which are closing. But a lot of that campaigning has been going on for decades with a very well organised sort of independent pub industry and so on. So that's why it's so fantastic to have the Music Venues Trust. And I think just by organising yourselves, you will already have a much stronger voice with government. I've met Mark and we are talking about all the different range of ideas that you've got. So I think that's real progress. And I think the point about Apple and indeed Google is well made. The Copyright Hub has come out partly out of those kind of discussions to ensure that people can get paid for the work they create. And I think it is a role for government to broker. We used to have long engagements with Google over piracy and so on. I think it's important that government brokers relationships between industries and some of these tech giants.
Peter, I'm going to come to you in a minute. I'm just going to let Chris come in and then. Yeah.
It's true that people make decisions on the basis of the law, but I think the law probably needs to change again to be able to answer the problem in Bristol. I happen to know it quite well because a friend of mine runs a pub round the corner. I think we're going to have to look at that again because there needs to be some kind of protection that is allowable in law so that, the appeals can't always succeed. On cuts, I mean, I'd make 2 points. First of all, Ed Sheeran, great artist. Friend of mine has written a song which has been much performed by him. It's been downloaded 6 million times, and he's earned £125 off that. So, the music writers, there's a whole world of problem in how we make sure that there is due compensation for the creativity and the ingenuity that people have, and that all the money doesn't just go to the performing artists themselves. I would I know it's awful when there's a party political row, but the truth is Labour trebled funding for the arts, and this government has cut it by a third, and they will probably cut it again. And it's not just the Arts Council budget and the DCMS budget that gets cut, it's local authority budgets. And many people here will be relying on local authorities for venues and for arts events and all the rest of it. And when those are being cut by 25% over 3 or 4 years, I think that that's a big problem for the country. The final thing I'd say is we've got to address that Ed Sheeran answer, the question about how do we make sure that there is a proper recompense for artists. I think that's why I was rather glad last week or the week before when UK Music won its battle against the government, its judicial review of the government's decision to change the copyright law.
I think Vick's going to claim that one as well. Vick, can I bring
we
you
were,
in?
We were one of the named
Indeed, yes,
claimants.
sorry, yeah, you were.
Vick, do you want to come back on? I saw you nodding there, and then we'll come to Peter on the
I
Apple
really
question.
would actually to the gentleman here. I don't know what sort of label you have, or whether you write your own music. But if you do write your own music, join BASCA. We have good relationships with lots of the digital music stores, and we can help broker good deals. With Apple, you probably do want to be joining AIM. You know, they take one-man bands. I really would. You know, by collectively joining together, you can have a much stronger voice. And actually, with regards to Google, that conversation really does need to continue on. We've got a way to go yet. You know, we have examples of our members who they sign up to the Google alerts, they track their own releases. Every day they're sent emails telling them where their music is being pirated. So, you know, we can still have you know, many things to say to Google. We'd also like to see the safe harbour legislation at a European level tightened up and redefined, and those are real campaign aims for us this year.
Okay, Peter, can you come in on the kind of Arts Council's role as a sort of...
Yes, it's a very good question from our colleague at British Underground. I'd just like to really say what Ed said about government applies to arm's length bodies as well, and if there's a useful role we can play, I'm sure we'll think about it. I've got colleagues of mine from the Arts Council here today which will be taking notes, and possibly we can have further conversations. Let's remember that the internet is just another part of society. It is not and cannot be unregulated. And you know, we've heard for 10 years from various people it is totally unregulated. It's not unregulated. And when there are platforms in the digisphere that are dominant, it is absolutely the role of government, as Ed said, to look at that and see if it's fair and whether they abuse their dominant position. And just one last point there about I've dropped another badge. Where are they coming from? One last point. Ed mentioned the Copyright Hub again, as I mentioned it earlier. They told me yesterday that at their meeting with Facebook said to them that they routinely strip the identifiers off any digital content that they have. That is a breach of the Copyright Act.
Indeed.
And so there are some quite important issues here for us all to follow up on. We not being clever enough. We haven't got enough universal reporting models. We haven't got enough universal identification techniques and so on. But, you know, there's a lot to do here, so you're quite right to raise it.
Can I just say one thing about arm's length? Because I think the arm's length principle, for me, is absolutely vital. Politicians shouldn't be deciding who gets what pots of money. And one of my anxieties is that what George Osborne tends to do is he likes opening things. He likes giving 60 million here, 120 million there, and actually that money should be going to the Arts Council to distribute on a non-political basis rather than be doled out little bits and pieces by the Chancellor personally.
Great, I'm going to take a couple more questions. So there's a gentleman over here, and then Matt at the back there, and a lady down here, and then we'll come back to the floor. If you could keep your questions really short, because we've got about 5 minutes left. So
yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
I'll do my best. I represent 4 music hubs in south of London. I was very happy to hear the emphasis on education, because all the kids we work with, all the people that will be here in 10 years' time, I can't understand why the DCMS and DFE can't work together, and why the Conservatives and the Labour can't work together. The InHarmony project you mentioned in Venezuela has been going for about 40 years, regardless of wars, revolutions, changes of government, economic ups and downs. So we need to learn a lesson from that. The DCMS has done a fantastic job for us with the education plan, Henley and Adonis and all that lot over the past 5 years, and I think the funding that hubs and education has been fantastic in the circumstances. And the ring fencing and the whole approach to how we're funded is amazing. And Chris Bryant is completely right that as you do all of that for us, you undermine us completely by destroying the local authorities and devaluing music in the schools, which makes our job twice as hard and wastes your money. So is the DCMS and DFE ever going to work together? And is there going to be some cross-cultural work between two fantastic ministers? Sorry.
Thank you. Aidan, do you want to come down here just because you won't have to walk so far? Do this one first and then go to Matt at the back. Thanks.
Hello, my name's Victoria. I'm from Sound and Music. So I'm posing a question that we got yesterday from our composer advisory group. And it's about standardised rates of pay for live music and for musicians to support and sustain live music across the UK, specifically with grassroots. What are your thoughts on this and whether this should be reintroduced?
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Matthew Lindley. When I'm not in the Hub T-shirt, I'm the Chief Executive of Liverpool Unity Theatre. And in that role, on Monday, I was in a meeting with, Baz would recognise this as the Grand Partnership, with Chief Executives and Pro-Vice-Chancellors and Vice-Chancellors from across the Northwest, actually. And one of the big themes that came out of that meeting was STEAM, not STEM, introducing arts back into the core curriculum from primary age right up through academia. And in fact, the chairing that session was a Pro-Vice-Chancellor from John Moores University who was leading the STEM funding body. And over the time that he was leading that, he found himself wondering, where is the A in STEM? So my question is really simple, actually, is what can the panel do to try and get A into STEAM? And what can we do as organisations and as musicians and artists to help support you do that?
Okay, there was somebody right next to you, I think. Who had
No,
that.
right in the corner there.
Right in the corner. Yeah. And then we'll come back to you guys. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Corey Mwamba. I'm a musician. There seems to be a lot of focus on the large throughout the entire conversation that I've heard today. And in terms of single musicians and non-venue based promoters, people working outside, in arts education, there doesn't seem to be that connection there. So, for example, all working musicians, they're sole traders, they're small businesses, and yet there doesn't seem to be any form of connection or conversation from what I've heard about how you would support them. I just find this all too much about the large, and I'm wondering what ideas you have to fix that.
Okay. Chris, do you want to go first this time?
Yes. Can I deal with STEAM, not STEM first? I mean, it just seems basic to me. One of the difficulties we faced before the general election was how to develop a policy that would actually apply to all schools, because so many schools now are not within local authority. It's something like 42% of schools in England are not subject to the national curriculum or part of the local authority system. So how do you develop a scheme that makes sure that that delivers? Well, I think there's two things you can do. First of all, you can make sure that every school gets brownie points, as it were, on the league table for arts education as well as for STEM. And the reason for that is because in the end, arts education is a multiplier in terms of success in every other part of the school. And if you think about it, a young person who takes part in a choir learns not just to dominate the whole thing, they learn to be part of a team, they learn to turn up on time, they learn about timing, they get the confidence of being with others and all the rest of it. And the same applies in every other part of arts education. And I think that's why we should be moving to a version of STEAM, not STEM, though the precise way in which you termed it, I think, won't work now about the national curriculum because it doesn't apply to everybody. That's why I said what I said about Ofsted, because the one thing you do have is Ofsted still inspects every school. So if part of Ofsted's inspection is around arts education, I think that's important. The gentleman there said about the large. I was talking about audiences of 8. I'm not sure. So I accept your point, and I thought the performance you had right at the beginning was brilliant. It reminded me in many ways, and perhaps some of what you're saying, is that song by Stephen Sondheim in Sunday in the Park with George called Putting on the Hat. When it's putting it together, you're trying to get the finances together, the venue together, the sponsors, and all the rest of it. And then where do you have time for the creativity? And how many, how much do you give to the commercial world that's there, and how much do you remain true to your own personal vision? That's a really tough gig. The one thing I think government can do is I think we need to change the conservatoires. Anybody who's teaching people for the business, either music, drama or whatever, I think there's too much of an emphasis on becoming a celebrity and being the number one, the lead. Actually, most people who make a living in the arts will not be playing the lead. They'll be doing they'll probably have a mixture of a career. They'll have to make a living, maybe out of teaching and all sorts of different things. And I think that we need to refocus all of that conservatoire education for the arts in the UK.
Great, thanks. Ed.
Well, I think the point about DCMS and DFE working together marries up with the point about STEM, not STEAM. I don't agree with the analysis of what Nicky Morgan has said at all. I think we work very well with the Department for Education. They've supported us on music education. They support us on culture education, not just with funding, but also with great input into the policy. I don't think Nicky Morgan has disparaged arts education in the slightest, nor has Nick Gibb. But she is going to give a speech, I think, quite shortly on arts and culture education. And arts remains part of the national curriculum. So I don't agree with any of that. And in fact, quite a lot of the reports I've commissioned on the sort of non-arts side have emphasised that point as well. So again, one of the first things I did in the last government when I became minister was commission a report into how do we support the video games industry by Ian Livingstone. And that puts it at heart. It makes the point, again, and Ian continues to make this point, that the games industry can't survive without the arts. It is STEAM, not STEM. The last science minister, David Willetts, used to talk about STEAM all the time. Standardised rates of pay is a complex issue, so I will happily revert back to you about what more we can do on that issue. And I think in terms of small versus big, again, I disagree with you. I don't think there is an emphasis on the big. I think across the piece there is support for the small, if I can put it in that way. As part of our music curriculum work, we wanted to give musicians qualified teacher status, an easy route to qualified teacher status, so they could participate with music hubs as teachers. You could take the Mayor of London's support for busking and the National Busking Day, which is about to happen. That is a very good example of the Mayor supporting one aspect of music that perhaps hasn't had as much attention and support in the past. You can approach the Arts Council as small, as one person, and get very quickly very small grants that can make a difference to the work that you are doing. So I think there is a lot of support for the small as well as for the large. And I think it's a mistake to think, I can totally understand why you might think that, the big corporates, say, Universal, etc., have a voice with government. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, the creation of something like the Music Venues Trust or the work of BASCA or the work of AIM also do support, I think, very strongly musicians from the small to the large.
Vick and then Peter to round off.
I totally agree. I think some of the conversation here this morning has been about the bigger picture, because the 4 points that were raised in the Vote for Music were those bigger picture issues, so tax and funding and education and so on. So that's what the conversation has been pinned on. But all of the time it goes back to the individuals. My organisation, we have nearly 2,000 individual members, all of whom are their own small businesses and entrepreneurs. And it is their creative talent and creative genius that in fact creates the entire music industry upon which the rest is pinned upon. So in my daily work, I never forget that it's all about the individual. And of course that all comes from the education policies that were set back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and so on. We are reaping the benefits of the education policies from back then. And of course we need to fight and protect and ensure, we're hearing wonderful words of support for creative education. And I just think I have heard actually just very recently talking about schools that have come out of local authority control we really do need to work more with the head teachers and the general teachers in those schools and parents. I'm a parent of teenagers. We really do need to work more with the schools in our area to encourage them to put more music and creativity into their programs that they're teaching.
Very briefly, because I know we're ending, I just want to pick up on Matthew's point. And I think what Ed said was absolutely right. I think Ed is personally very committed to the question of education, but the problem we've been trying to deal with is that because education hasn't been good enough, and we've focused down on numeracy and literacy quite rightly, and then we've broadened that out and focused on some of the interests of science, technology, and engineering, again, quite rightly, it had in danger of becoming too instrumentalist, and we know that's a problem, and that's what we're trying to tackle. And Chris made the interesting point about whether school inspections, whether you could be outstanding if you haven't got a decent arts and creative education in the school. Now, we haven't got to that point yet. I'd like to think we would, but we have made a start. And just so you know, from 2 years ago when I didn't have a dialogue with Ofsted, I now do have a dialogue with Ofsted, and in fact they've invited my Arts Council colleagues into their 8 regional conferences for school inspectors for us to tell them what a decent creative education looks like to inform their inspections. So I feel we're making some progress. Equally, we've got new GCSEs in creative subjects coming on stream in 2016. But there is a job to do here, so we're right to be concerned. We must keep at it. So I'm glad you asked that question, Matthew.
Great, thank you. I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm sure some of you had other questions. I've got a list of questions and I didn't get to ask them, and I'm in charge. So that's a bit odd. So we are running slightly behind schedule, which is obviously traditional at this point in the day. So we're going to take a 15-minute break now, and then I could ask you to come back. We're going to have the first of our postcard from the future provocations from Kareem Fanous from Music Ally. So while you have your break, if you want to pre-order your lunch, that will mean you will eat much quicker at lunchtime. So on that very practical note, I'll send you off to Drink and Network.